Alright, what's going on? This is History of Jake, Part 2. We are broadcasting live from my trench. I've been updating it, keeping it healthy last few years. Got out of shape a while ago, but I've redug it, got everything back set. There you go. I think there might be a bee nest or like a honey bee nest somewhere down there, but that's besides the point. Anyway, so might be asking why we're in my trench, why I'm in this World War I uniform. So today we're going to be talking about the Spanish flu, which is topical because of coronavirus and COVID-19 and all that. And as an aside, first of all, I called coronavirus in January, mid-January. People that have sat next to me, people know me, they know I called coronavirus. I've been talking about 3-4 months now, okay? I knew this back when it was like 20 people had it in like China. I knew about coronavirus. So just saying, I called it, first of all. So basically, the Spanish flu I think it was basically the first modern epidemic. It happened at the very end of World War I in 1918. 1919, it had 3 waves. 1918, 1919, 1921, and 22-23. And we'll get to that later. But the first wave was basically started, the Allies, the Allied powers, they relied on Chinese industry, basically. So what they would do, they would import like hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of cheap Chinese labor to like Canada, San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York, so on and so on. And they would also import them a lot through Russia. They would take them on the Trans-Siberian Railway all the way to Moscow, make them produce like bullets for the front. And they did in Spain, a lot Alright, so they did a lot in Spain and France and Portugal. Not so much in Britain, because Britain had a pretty industrialized, modernized industrial base, so they didn't really need that cheap Chinese labor. So anyway, so from what I understand, the Spanish flu, it started in southern China, where coronavirus also started. Because southern China, they have a lot of wet markets where they sell different exotic things, bats, number one, soups, different pagnolias, which I think is a weird Chinese like salamander or something. But also an aside, I'm like 95% sure coronavirus is actually a Chinese biological weapon, and the whole wet market thing is just a convenient cover. Because a lot of other viruses started because of the wet markets and all that kind of stuff. SARS started that because of that, for example. Yeah. But a lot of viruses start in China, first of all, because they're very cramped, they're very uncleanly, they eat a lot of that weird stuff, so it's just a higher overall chance that a virus is going to start there. So basically the virus, it caught on with these Chinese immigrant workers that they were importing to Western countries to make cheap labor. And they were importing them. Eventually the virus just spread all throughout them and all throughout the populations in the area. And yeah, that's basically how it happened. And the first wave it basically hit at the very end of World War II. No one was prepared for it. The reason, and that kind of comes into why it's called the Spanish flu. It's called the Spanish flu because because all the major countries who got the biggest hits of the Spanish flu, they had major wartime propaganda efforts. And they were not going to allow that kind of information to get out to harm national morale, because national morale was already pretty low, especially in the Soviet Union. Well, Russia. National morale was already pretty low due to them killing each other in a civil war. So national morale was pretty low, so they weren't going to allow anything like that to happen. But the only country in Europe who was importing the workers to create these cheap goods for the war, was Spain. And Spain was neutral. They were just selling to the highest bidder, basically. In Spain, they they were the first to report on it because the press was still free at the time, and that's how it gets the name the Spanish flu. And eventually the virus had killed, it didn't kill, it infected like 500 million, I think it killed maybe 50 million. And to give you some context, 500 million back then was like 1/3 of the entire population of the planet Earth, so that is pretty crazy. Coronavirus is kind of easy compared to that. But, yeah, 1/3 of the population of the Earth, that's crazy. If that happened today, it would be like 2.5 billion people were infected per capita, you know? That's crazy. It killed 50 million. It infected 600,000 people in the United States, which nowadays would probably be like 40 million people, which is like 80 times what coronavirus is right now. So it was pretty crazy. It got out because people weren't really, I think coronavirus naturally isn't as effective as that, but just because of the times, the medical ability of the times, they just didn't have the resources to contain the virus. And we'll get to that. The first wave ended because eventually people got the idea. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to go out there, you know? I'm going to stay at home. And it was like a year. World War I ended. Everybody got home, chilled for like 2-3 months. Then, everybody just went back to work, like nothing happened. And everybody went back to work, and everybody immediately got the virus again. And that was the second wave. Then, after the second wave, the Western governments are like, okay, we're going to chill out for like a year, maybe 2, we're just going to vibe, okay? We're not going to do anything crazy. And the Western governments, they basically didn't get the third wave. They got in some really urban areas, New York, Philadelphia, because it's kind of just hard to do anything there without getting infected. And most of the third wave was in rural parts, China, India, Russia, so on and so on. Russia, mostly because they were in a civil war, they didn't really care. They couldn't take the day off, you know. And China, because super packed together, where the virus originated, it's just like, and they couldn't, it's just tough, you know. You can't stay home. You're making 2 pennies a year, you know. You can't just like stay home. Then you got then India, basically the same deal. They were under British control too, so they were always kind of, you know, get the work done. Make me tea, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so, yeah. Although the Spanish flu still wasn't the biggest epidemic ever, the biggest epidemic ever still to this day is the Black Plague, the Black Death. Bruh. That was no joke. The Black Death was no joke. That killed 1/3 of the population, not infected. Killed 1/3 of the population of Europe. That's crazy. Like, that's insane. Anyway. And one little interesting fact about the Spanish flu, there's the naval governor of American Samoa saw the whole flu, all the epidemic stuff spread, and he got early word of it. He like quarantined the entire island of American Samoa. And basically, to this day, American Samoa is one of the last genomes on planet Earth where the people living there, they have a genome that is not adapted to like pandemics. They just never evolved to it because they were entirely quarantined during the entire thing. Well, until now. They probably got infected by it now, but you get the idea. So for a lot of years, scientists would go to American Samoa. They'd study the people living there because it's just an oddity, you know? It's a very interesting thing to see how a human genome reacts without being exposed to major pandemic. So up until this day, they probably have COVID-19 out the wazoo over there now, but yeah, they're the only genome for a long time that wasn't exposed to a whole pandemic. Well, that's about it about the Spanish flu. Update on the current numbers. America, we got 550,000 infected, 22,000 dead, maybe 23,000 dead, which is actually not that bad. That's like a 2% death rate. In Italy, it's a 13% death rate, so that's pretty insane. So we're actually doing all right per capita. We're actually all right. We're about where we should be. And we're going to do fine. If school opens, I don't know. I don't think school is gonna open because we still got maybe a week or two before the curve goes down. In my expert medical opinion, I would not go back to school for the rest of the year. It's just too easy to, it's like a freaking wildfire. It'd be too easy just for a virus to start, and you know, you have to start all over, go through a second wave like the Spanish flu. No, yeah. Well, everybody stay safe, stay healthy, quarantine yourself. And this was History of Jake Part 2, Spanish Flu Edition. See you guys later.